Now, if you are in elementary or preschool, or if you have a child in elementary or preschool, those children are now going to leave. Preschool are going to head out on this way. So, kids, you can just head up. All right. Okay. So we're actually, this is the first Sunday of the month, and you've probably noticed on the first Sunday we're changing the format a little bit, and we're trying to create. We're experimenting basically, and that's why it probably feels a little disjointed. Different people getting up and, at different times, but we're trying to find a way to include the kids in the worship time more, and that, it works better to do that at the beginning of the service, and then they can head out to their different activities when we're doing the message in here, rather than the usual format where we have the message up front. So just bear with us as we experiment with that a little bit. We're just trying to find ways we can be a community together, not necessarily everybody together all the time, but times when we can do that. Because I think that's a very important thing. Okay, so we are starting a new series today. It's called Stories of Hope. We've actually done a series like this. This is the third time at this time of year that we've done it, third time in a row. And it kind of feels fitting because it's the lead into the holiday time, right? The lead into Advent and Christmas and all those celebrations. And that's a time when we traditionally think about hope. And so what we do in this series is reflect on the issues of hope in a very personal way. We're going to be hearing each week from a different person from our community, and they're going to share some of their story about hope. Today we're going to hear from Caroline Ferranti a little bit later on, but I'm going to share a little bit about, I guess, just to frame this series, talk about hope in general. Talk about hope from the perspective of our vision to follow Jesus, to set it up. A couple of things about hope. Firstly, we're not going to be, hope is not wishful thinking, right? So we're not going to be talking about, just believe in God, just follow Jesus, and everything will be okay. I mean, has anybody found that to be true? Because we've got a bunch of followers of Jesus in this room. Has anybody got a perfect life where all their problems got solved, right? So, empirically, that would not seem to be true, right? That, God is not a magician who waves a magic wand and makes everything okay. Okay, we're not following that kind of God. That's not the spirituality that we're in. At the same time, we have a vision, we have a call, and we call that our vision, and you can read that. I think it's on the back of the bulletin, the community flyer that we bring out every couple of weeks. We have a vision to follow Jesus that's all about hope and transformation. In other words, we are a people committed to hope. We're also committed to transformation. In other words, we believe that the world can be a better place. We believe that we can be better people. We believe that change is possible. We believe that there's always hope, that this is not the end. Whatever situation we are in, this is not the end. And so as a people of hope, what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean to be a people of hope? And I guess in this series, and over the course of this series, as we unpack this issue, and as we talk about it in a very practical and personal way through stories, my hope is that we'll, as we approach the end of this month, going into Advent, we'll be called, we'll feel a new energy, we'll feel a renewed call to be a people of hope. A people of hope who are kind of resolutely committed to that. People who refuse to despair, if you like. People who embody hope. Not that hope that everything's going to work out the way we want it to, or even the way we necessarily expect it to. But that people that hold on to hope, even in the darkest of circumstances. And we're going to talk a little bit about what might that mean initially here, and then I'm going to invite Caroline to come up and share with us. As we think about hope, I think I want us to, bear a couple of things in mind. And we can hold these with us through the series. First one is this: we all have different situations going on in our lives where there's varying degrees of hope, right? So we have some situations where we may have totally given up on hope. We may just think that situation's not going to change, or we can't do anything about it. And then we have other situations where it might be more helpful. So we're all kind of on this spectrum of hope from kind of 0 to 10. Let's say 10 is the most hopeful you can possibly be, and 0 is despair and despond. we're all somewhere on that spectrum, but not, and it varies depending on the situation, right? There are certain situations we can feel optimistic about, and certain situations we feel very pessimistic about. Okay, so let's just bring those to the fore. Let's hold those in front of us. Let's reflect on, as we're going through this series, those situations in our lives and what level of hope we have, and just be real and honest about that. Okay, we're not necessarily going to get to talk to anybody about that, here, but we're going to be honest with ourselves. We can also face the fact, this is, I suppose, the other issue, that hope is a really tricky issue for us. It's a very difficult issue for us, right? And I think that itself is for a couple of reasons. One, life can be really difficult, right? So the world can be a very dark place. When we're coming towards the end of the year, as we sort of reflect back on the past year, if we just take out personal issues and just think about what's happened on a global scale, it's been a pretty depressing year, right? And there's lots of bad things going on. Are we meant to hope for the best in those situations? I mean, what does hope even look like? I mean, hope is really hard because life can be really hard. And not only that, it's hard in a very personal way, right? I'm very privileged to get to talk to a lot of people in this community, and it's amazing the amount of struggle and difficulty and pain that we collectively go through. And I don't think that we're a particularly unusual group of people. Maybe in some ways, we're a little unusual in some ways. But what I mean is, we're probably a random sample when it comes to trouble, right? But we wrestle with all kinds of difficulties. So hope is difficult. A, because it's pretty bleak out there sometimes, and B, because we've all been disappointed, right? We've all had hope about things in different situations, and had that disappointed and things not turn out the way we wanted them to. We might even feel that we've kind of called out and cried out to God and asked God for help with certain things, and nothing's changed. And so, what's the point in hoping anyway? Because you only get your expectations up, and then you might get disappointed. Right? So there's some of our challenges, I think, going into this. So let's just bear those in mind, and then at the same time bear in mind, well, hang on a minute, if we're not going to be hopeful, what are some of the alternatives? And as we think about ourselves on the spectrum of hope we were talking about a minute ago, maybe we've kind of lent towards some of these alternatives. Now, I'm just going to mention a few of them, and there's way more than this, but you may or may not identify with some of these. There's despair, right? We could just despair about life. Life is just totally random, totally unpredictable, and we're just at the mercy of whatever happens. And the universe is just a dark, empty place at the end of the day. That's one way of approaching it, right? But we might not be despairing, we might just be indifferent. We might be like, well, who knows? I mean, things might work out well, things might not be. And we're kind of at neutral. We may not feel as negative as despairing, but we're kind of at neutral. Another approach might be playing the victim, right? Well, life's terrible, and it's not my fault, and it's all everybody else's fault, and do the poor old me thing. I mean, I'm really good at that. I think most of us in the room are probably really good at that because it feels so much better, right? It feels good to think that it's not fair, and it's the universe has ganged up on me. There's something not right about that, but it kind of makes us feel better temporarily, at least. So we might choose that route, and we might be playing that role in certain hope scenarios in our life. There's cynicism, right, which is perhaps more kind of a little more negative indifference or more intentional indifference, where we're not just indifferent, we're sarcastic and mocking even of hope, and we might even despise hopeful people, or we kind of make fun or condescend to people who have hope. We can fall into a number of categories. So the alternatives to hope are not that fantastic either, right? Hope is a risk because we might get disappointed, but I think that's what the issue is here. That could we choose to risk being people of hope when there's this really strong magnetic pull to be everything else, all those other alternatives I mentioned and the other ones I haven't mentioned? Can we choose intentionally to be hopeful? And what does that look like? If it's not just, oh, everything working out fine and us all sort of skipping off into the sunset, living happily ever after, because that somehow doesn't seem very realistic. Okay, so that's the nature of what we're exploring today. We're going to look at a story, briefly, from the Gospel of Mark. It's in chapter 4. I think this story is pretty famous. And we're going to read it, and we're just going to make a few points about it, and then Caroline's going to come up and share with us. Mark writes his account of Jesus' life in a very quick-fire, succinct, economy of language kind of way, and that's how he tells this story. Matthew and Luke both tell the same story. They probably actually drew it from Mark, but they kind of embellish it a little bit, a bit more detail. Mark's just bare bones the facts. Here it is. That day when evening came, he came to his disciples and said, let us go over to the other side. Okay, so Jesus has been teaching and doing all kinds of miracles and amazing things. He's got this crowd of people following him, and he's by the Sea of Galilee, and he's saying, let's go to the other side of the lake, the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? They were terrified and asked each other, Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Okay, so I like that ending of the story, by the way. So I think it's a very humorous, ironic ending where Jesus is sort of challenging them for being afraid, and then it says they were terrified. It's like they were afraid of that storm, right? But then they're almost even more terrified that he just calmed the wind and the rain and all the rest of it. So it's like they can't win, these poor guys. They're just, And then Jesus is playing this role of almost like a critic, right? Saying, are you really so afraid? I mean, what are you afraid of? And it's like, well, we're going to die, we're going to drown. And Jesus, in some respects, seems to be missing the point, okay? Probably not likely that Jesus is missing the point, not as Mark writes his stories. It probably means that we're missing the point in some kind of way. And so that really is a cue to us, I think, to think, hang on a minute, what's really going on here? What's really going on here? Okay, so what we're going to do is just sort of try and dig a little deeper into this story and find out, as always, that there's layered meanings here. At the surface level, this could just be a story about the fact that when times get bad, call out to God, God will get up, click God's fingers, and everything will be good again. Right? That's what this could mean. And that's one basic interpretation. I don't think that's an accurate interpretation, as we'll see. And it's certainly, as we, I think, just admitted, not our experience in life. Right? And so one problem with that interpretation is that we can then start thinking, oh, well, there must be something wrong with me then, because I've done that and God hasn't helped out. And, Jesus is still asleep in the boat, apparently, and not listening to me. Or maybe he didn't even get in the boat in the first place. Or maybe there's no Jesus. If we interpret this passage that way and it's not working out for us, there's all kinds of extrapolations that don't seem to add up for us either. All right, so we're going to be pulled into this story because there's some things that are a little confusing and there's some loose ends that don't really make sense. So I just want to bring out a few issues that might help us get into it a little bit, but I'm going to leave a lot of issues unsaid and undone as well. I hope what it will do is draw us in to reflect more deeply on this issue of hope ourselves. Now, in the story, there's a few things that we can note, all right, that are interesting. Firstly, this is a miracle, right? Did anybody notice that? Has anybody ever seen somebody control the weather? Anybody here? In a very personal way like that. Okay, no. Well, let me ask you another story. Has anybody here ever seen or experienced somebody being healed in an unexplainable kind of way? I have. Right. Okay, so when Jesus is going around healing people and even casting out demons and that kind of thing, I've experienced, we'll go into details now, but situations where people have had you could very easily say was a sort of an overpowering spiritual experience that seemed very evil. Okay, and we won't go into details, but that's for another day. But we can just about relate to those things. When Jesus is healing people and all the rest of it, it's like, well, yeah, and I used to be a doctor. In medicine, people get better for reasons we have no idea about all the time. Right? Because we don't understand it all. We don't fully understand the human body. We don't fully understand what's going on with all these kind of things. We don't fully understand the universe. However, I have never seen anybody control the weather. That seems kind of like, that's another level of intervention, right? So that immediately, I think, makes us think, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Or it should do, because we've never experienced it or seen it before. It's kind of, this is really miraculous. And it could be that Mark is telling this story because it's such an amazing miracle. Well, maybe, but he's telling it in a certain way. And let's look at how he's telling it to discern whether or not it's the amazing miracle that's really the whole point here. Well, here's a couple of other issues that might help us with that. Firstly, Jesus says, let's go to the other side of the lake, right? So it's Jesus that gets them into trouble in the first place. Right? When we think about hope and issues of hope, a lot of the times, we're not the ones who got ourselves into trouble, right? Stuff happens. And circumstances happen, and we might blame ourselves, but it's not necessarily our fault, right? The situations we're in aren't necessarily our fault. So perhaps the first part of addressing hope is engaging with the issues where we're feeling despairing maybe, and realizing they're not necessarily our fault. It also implies that following Jesus is risky. Okay, so if following Jesus means having hope, then hope is risky. Hope is risky. Jesus is not necessarily going to lead us into an idyllic life. And we see this played out in the Gospel of Mark time and time again, especially in the latter half of Mark, where it seems Mark spends the first half of his book building the case for Jesus to be the Messiah, and then he spends the second half of the book building the case for why the Messiah is misunderstood. In other words, the Messiah doesn't come to just put everything right and everybody's happy and goes home. No, the Messiah lives the right way, and as a result of that, suffers and eventually is killed and calls his followers to live the right way. It's as though he's embodying hope as living the right way, not everything working out right. Okay, and he's led them in this story into a bit of trouble. Now, the third thing we can notice is that there's a load of Hebrew metaphors in here. There's the metaphor of the sea. We said many times here before. The sea, the ocean in Hebrew mythology was evil or chaotic or disordered. It represented something that you wanted to be away from, something that you wanted to exert some kind of control over. Okay, so in the beginning of Genesis, we have the earth is covered in the sea, and God brings order out of that. And it's chaotic and awful, and light comes, and separation, and all the rest of it, and order comes out of it. At the end of the Bible, in Revelation, we have a new heaven and a new earth, this vision of a new heaven and a new earth anyway, and it says, and there's no sea. In other words, the sea, the chaos, the darkness has disappeared. Now, I think we should take that metaphorically, but Jesus here is clearly, in a Hebrew sense, exercising power over chaos and darkness. Just like he's exercising power over chaos and darkness when he's healing people and casting out demons and loving people and doing all the things that Jesus is doing throughout the rest of Mark. So, and you can read this later, but there's a particular Psalm 107, that describes this kind of story almost exactly. There's a section in Psalm 107 that talks about people who are out on the sea and they're in a storm and they cry out to God, and God comes and helps them. And so there's a lot of analogy here in this story. And perhaps that's part of the meaning, because in telling this story, Mark seems to be saying that Jesus is the Lord, that Jesus is God incarnate, that Jesus is the presence of God fully in human form. And Mark does that in a very different way to how Matthew and Luke do it. During Advent, we're going to read Matthew and Luke's accounts of Jesus' birth. And they sort of, from the onset, explain who Jesus is. Mark doesn't do that. Mark doesn't explain who Jesus is from the beginning. He just begins to tell stories about Jesus and then lets us make up our own mind about Jesus. And then about halfway through, he actually says to Peter, who do people say I am? And Peter says, well, they think you're a prophet, they think you might be this. And he says, well, who do you think I am? And that's the big turning point in Mark, is where it's almost like asking the reader, who do you think Jesus is? And Peter says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. So there's this revelation, this progressive revelation. As I said, what it means to be the Christ, what it means to be the Messiah, is another issue. Mark then deals with that for the next 8 chapters. But we have here, I think, Mark making the case that Jesus is the Lord. Okay, so we have not only Jesus present in the boat, but in some sense we have God present in this boat. Now, the storm still breaks out. And the storm results in several questions being asked. Okay, so we're just going to look at those questions for a second. The questions that are asked are very simple questions. Does anybody remember any of the questions, in fact? What questions got asked? There's 3 groups of questions, really. Anybody else?
They asked, don't you care if we drown?
Yeah, don't you care if we drown? That's a great question, right? Don't you care if we drown? In other words, they're worried that Jesus just doesn't care. Okay, so if we think about the situations we're in, it's a big concern. Does God care? I mean, is God present or not? If God isn't acting, I mean, this is there's not time to go into this, but this is what we talked about a few weeks ago. Where, okay, I mean, if God is all powerful and all loving, how come God just lets horrible things happen to us and to others? And what we might wonder is, don't you care? Don't you care? I mean, it's very real, very real. What's another question that gets asked in there? Who is this? Right? Oh, sorry, John. Who is this? Right? Correct. Who is this? And I think that's the question that really is like asking the reader, well, who is it? Right? So part of the meaning of this story is to get us to work out who is Jesus. What's the other question? Why are you afraid? And there's a connection to it. Why do you have so little faith? All right? What do you think Jesus means by that? Why does Jesus ask, why are you afraid?
He said, don't you believe it? I'm here with you. You should know you'll be saved.
Right. So, don't you believe in me? Don't you know you'll be safe? Yeah. What? Pete? Sorry? Where is your hope? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, was somebody else had a hand up? What is it you're afraid of losing? Yeah, all kinds of questions. Here's something to think about, though. What if they had trusted Jesus? What if they were not afraid? What would they have done? They probably wouldn't have woken Jesus up, right? Because you can imagine, hey, we're drowning. Let's wake Jesus up. Oh, no, we'll be all right. I'm not afraid. Okay, let's just keep going. He can carry on sleeping. So therefore, Jesus wouldn't have woken up, and Jesus wouldn't have got up, and wouldn't have rebuked the storm, and they'd have carried on through the storm, right? So in other words, in some way, Jesus calming the storm is not necessarily the real point. Because what he's pointing out, the question he asked them, is, why are you so afraid? Implying that you didn't need me to do this. Now, he might be implying you could have gone and calmed the storm. I think that's asking a lot of those guys. I don't think Jesus was necessarily saying that. I wonder if what Jesus is saying is, look, you have me here. And this is why Mark is asking us, who is this? It's like, okay, and Jesus has been, this is chapter 4. Jesus has already been, like, Jesus is saying, this is God present with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. Hope is about me being with you. Hope isn't about me solving the storm, because, there could be a storm tomorrow. There could be another storm when they sail back. Hope is about God being with us. And I'm going to push through this point a little bit because of time, and we'll come back to it in successive weeks. But I think what the point of this story is that they have the presence of God with them. God is present with us. God might seem asleep. God doesn't always seem present. God can sometimes seem absent. But hope, it seems, is the belief that God is with us and we're going to act like God is with us. Rather than that we've been deserted. Rather than that God is absent. Rather than God is just doesn't care. Rather than God doesn't care that we drown. And that takes incredible courage. Because everything in us wants to think, he's asleep in a boat. He doesn't care about us one bit. But they know that Jesus isn't like that. They know that he does care. They know that he is with them. He's for them, right? That's what Jesus is about. And so hope, it seems, is not Jesus getting up and everything's fine. Oh, thank goodness. Thank you, Jesus. Right, on to the next problem. Then, oh, Jesus, this one? Okay. Oh, thank you very much. And then on to the next one. It's not like that. That seems, it's not our experience, and it seems a ridiculous notion. Rather, is hope more about us holding on to God's presence through all the difficulties that we engage and choosing, and I think if we look at the larger landscape of Mark's gospel here, and think about the latter half of it, choosing to do the right thing, choosing to love when everybody else is hating, choosing to forgive when nobody else is forgiving, choosing to take the road and the pathway of light rather than darkness, choosing hope rather than despair, choosing openness and honesty rather than cynicism. In all the situations we're in, we could be unhopeful by choosing all these other negative outcomes and just resolving to the darkness, dissolving into the darkness. Or we can say, no, God is with us. I can't always feel it, I can't always see it, I can't always sense it, and I know that God is not just going around like some magician fixing all these problems. That's just ridiculous. But somehow God is present in this suffering with me, in this darkness, and helping me walk through it, and that I can, and it's worth making right decisions. It's worth not being a cynic, it's worth not despairing, it's worth not being afraid, it's worth believing the best about people, even though things are not going to work out the way I necessarily want them to be. And even though I might have more darkness to walk through, I'm going to choose this pathway of hope. I think hope is something that comes to us in the hard things of life. It's not something about fairy tale endings. It's not something about, oh, everything's fine. It's about us actually finding a new ending, maybe. It's about us finding a new resolution, about finding another way through something that we might never have seen before. And I sense that this is one, at least, of the meanings in this story. Now, I'm going to invite Caroline up to come and share with us. Caroline, do you want to come? She's going to share with us a story that I think, in some respects, illustrates this issue. We're going to grab a couple of chairs here. And, all right. Let's give Caroline a round of applause. Just to welcome her. Before she does anything.
Thank you.
So, Caroline, you're going to share with us a little bit about a story of hope, but it's kind of a dark story, right? I mean, it's a story
Definitely.
that's set in some darkness, and it begins with a little bit with your family of origin. So, just share with us a little bit about that, and then
Sure.
I'll ask you a few questions.
Sure. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and my mom and dad, just appeared to be pillars of the church. My dad was a treasurer, my mom was a deaconess. My mom was part of the kind of that new charismatic movement in the 70s, speaking in tongues and all that. So everybody would tell me how lucky I was to have my family. But my family was very different behind closed doors. And it really was a nightmare because I had to keep pretending that they were the pillars of the church and so forth. There was all kinds of abuse in our family, and I think the worst of it for me was that my father was a cruel man, and he seemed to be somewhat driven and addicted to just making his children feel pain, and his wife as well. And so to come then to church on Sunday mornings and dress up and pretend like I was okay and I believed all this was, that's what I grew up with. But I tried to keep the family secret. That was the cardinal rule. We have to keep this secret. And I was told, my mother framed it all for me in a way. She unfortunately told me that, God lets these things happen. And so this must be happening to you because there's a reason. He's doing this,
Right.
And kind of, she threw God under the bus, really. But I believed that. I mean, I was little, I was 3, 4, 5, and so I kind of internalized that, and I believed that.
How did that resolve, or where did that go as you got older? So I mean, obviously you leave home at some point.
Yeah.
How was your relationship with your family after you left home?
After I left home, it was difficult, obviously, and thankfully I was in a youth ministry in college, and I was able to get some help and start to work through those things, just begin to. But I never said anything to my family. It was kind of a private thing I was trying to work through. And when I finally did talk to my mom and dad about it, their response was, well, you're just, you're crazy, and obviously you're delusional, and we'll keep paying for you to go to a psychiatrist because you clearly need help, but this never happened. And I was, when I'm still in school, I was completely dependent on them still. So I maintained this relationship with them, and I tried to walk this balance of remembering what was true, but somehow healing. I don't know, it was tenuous. It was a difficult time.
And you also had a very specific and very damaging incident with your family once you had kids. So
absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that was obviously very
sure. So fast forwarding a few years, I would see my family very rarely because it was just kind of oppressive. It was very difficult. And then once I had kids, of course, I didn't want my kids subjected to any of those things like I was. And so I never ever left them alone with my mom or dad. But I think the abuse had spread farther than I had imagined. And so once when I was visiting with my sister, her adult nephew abused one of my children. And thankfully, my child told me right away, so it only happened once that I'm aware of. And a couple days later, I called my sister and I said, hey, I think this happened. Can we talk about this? And her first response was, please don't tell anyone, please don't call the police. He was breaking his probation. He wasn't supposed to be with children.
So he had a track record?
He actually was a registered offender, and I had no idea. They had kept that secret. And of course, if I'd known that, I would have, But again, more secrets, just more secrets. And I had a very difficult decision to make at that point, because I really pleaded with my sister, with my family, this is a time where we can talk about this and just get it all out in the open, and there can be some forgiveness and there can be some healing. And I even believed a little hope at that point that maybe that could be how it was going to play out. But after a couple of weeks, it became very clear that they were circling the wagons, and it was back to the same old thing. This didn't happen. Children are resilient. We don't really need to talk about this, and children make things up.
So they were asking you to ignore it?
Absolutely, yeah. And that really wasn't a choice. Thankfully, I was enough out of that system that wasn't a choice for me. So I had to make the difficult decision to report it to the police. And as a result, not only this story, but several stories about other family members came out. So it really did come out in the light anyway, but in a way that was a little bit more jarring and obviously more difficult. And I was completely cut off from my family. So I think I was 30. How old were you at the time? That's my daughter, Olivia. I'm not good with numbers anyway.
I was 8.
Were you 8 when that happened? Yeah. So I was pretty young. And also at that point, Olivia's dad, it was just all a little too much reality for him as well. And so he left.
Yeah.
So I lost my husband, I lost my family, and I had just moved here to Maryland, and I knew nobody at all. Yeah.
So, is there any hope in this story?
Well, at that point,
right. What's
I felt
interesting
gypped. I felt completely gypped.
Yeah.
I have really tried to be a good Christian here. I'm really trying to be forgiving. I'm trying to face reality. I'm trying to do the right things. Yeah. And I felt like God had an obligation to do better than this.
Right.
I really did. Maybe that's not the right thing to say, but that's how I felt.
Yeah.
I was angry.
And it's interesting you said, you had, your imagination has all these scenarios that, well, it could work out like this, maybe, and then we start trying to think that, oh, God must be orchestrating this.
Yeah,
And then when it doesn't work out, it's just even more despair and,
The bottom just fell out.
Tell us how this, so you're here in Maryland,
So I'm here.
very alone, in a pretty dark place.
Absolutely. And
Take us from there.
The church I was at the time had a ministry called Celebrate Recovery, so I started to go to that. And at Celebrate Recovery, I walked by a room once and I saw this woman sitting with a group, and there was something about this woman that just drew me, and I wasn't supposed to go into that room, but I went there anyway. Went into that room, and I just wanted to be a part of her sharing group, and it was Robin Herman. Some of you may know Robin. I got to know Robin, and over time she heard my story, and then one day Robin invited me to her home to meet her husband Art, and they told me that they were going to become my parents, that they wanted to adopt me and my children, and that we were now part of their family. It was astounding. It was just an amazing thing, and it kind of felt too good to be true at the time, but they really started to do that. And as a woman who didn't really even know what that was supposed to mean, I certainly never saw that in a healthy way, they were starting to model to me what that was supposed to look like. So, you know, when my appliances were falling apart in my house, Art was over, yes, trying to help me fix everything again and again and again. They would take the kids out. Remember when Robin would take you to do crafts and things, Art would do models and things with my son. And they became the parents that I really never did have.
So they really followed through practically on what they said they were going to do. I mean, that just wasn't a pat on the back, oh, we'll be your new parents. They would
Exactly.
live that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I started to experience something with them that I never felt before. It was probably like a sense of security.
Yeah.
You know, just a sense of they really love me no matter what. I mean, they saw me at the ugliest time of my life. A lot of times I think there's a whole decade no makeup would stick to my face because I was just crying all the time, and it was ugly tears sometimes, but they just loved me right through it. And Robin was with me, you know, anytime I needed a call, she was there. So it was incredibly healing.
Yeah.
And I found a family.
Yeah. Now you're a musician.
Yeah.
And you've said to me many times that you find it easier to express yourself through music sometimes than by talking, right? I mean, you've done a great job talking this morning. But Caroline's going to play a song for us that came out of this experience, right? Do you want to just say a little bit about that before you play it for us?
Sure. This song kind of came out of nowhere. I wasn't intentionally writing this song at that time, but there was a melody that came to me one morning and some words, and it's a song about unconditional love, about somebody loving you in an ugly place. And as I was writing the song, I realized it really is about Art and Robin. But it was about more than that too. I really think Art and Robin kind of became God's love to me in that time. And I couldn't really grasp it in any other way, but I needed someone to put some arms and legs to it, just to kind of be there face to face to help me get back into that, remembering what God's love was. And so this is also, I think, about that as well.
That's great.
So.
Okay, so you're going to play to it. So as Caroline is playing, let's just reflect. I mean, obviously listen to the song. After she's played the song, I'm going to get up and lead us in a prayer, and then Caroline's going to close us out in another song that we can stand and sing together. Okay, so, but let's just listen to her now.
I have never built up a song so much as I have this morning, so forgive me. Forgive me if I can't deliver. I'm just going to hope you'll love me anyway. for some anger to roll over me like the waves on the shore. But your eyes, they're always smiling. Guess I'm still hurting from someone who came before. And you love, and you love, you love me anyway. And you love, and you love, me anyway. The leaves are falling in the storm. The trees are tossed and they are torn. Could I blossom in a storm? Could I ever feel warm somehow? And you love, and you love, you love me anyway. And you love, me anyway.
Why don't we all stand up? She hasn't finished yet. So I'm just going to pray, and then Caroline's going to lead us in a song. Some of you may know this song, probably most will not. It's very, very simple though, and the words will appear on the screen. It's very repetitive, so you'll pick it up very, very easily. So I'm just going to pray, and then she's going to lead us into that. As we pray, let's just open our hearts to God, and as we sing that song together, maybe just for now, let's close our eyes. Lord, we come to you as people that at times feel downtrodden. We do feel victims. We feel victims of circumstances. We struggle with life. Lord, there are times when life goes really well too. But Lord, often we struggle, and we've all got different struggles right now. And Lord, if we're honest, sometimes it feels like you're not there. Or at least you're asleep in the boat. And God, we're not expecting you to wave a wand. But Lord, we want to be faithful. We want to be faithful to you. You said, what's happened to your faith? You asked your followers that. And Lord, we want to have faith. We want to have hope. Lord, we want to have the kind of faith and hope that can carry us through the hardest and darkest of circumstances. Lord, we want to have hope that we can live and make the right choices and be the kind of people you've called us to be, even when it's hard and it's not paying off, and everything in us wants to resort to cynicism and despair. Lord, we want to be a people of hope that can love others in the way that Caroline was loved. Lord, we want to be people who can be hope in other people's lives. So God, we just come to you now and ask you to empower us in every way to be a people of hope, to be a people of hope in such despair and darkness. So come, Holy Spirit. Come and fill us. Come to us in our need. Come to us in our pain. Come to us in our storms. Come, Holy Spirit.